right. Well, good morning, church. How are you guys? Good morning, church. Yay, there we go. We're awake. Yeah, it's the early service, but you had your caffeine this morning, right? That's good. Well, it's so good to be here. We are going to finish up our series, Finding God this morning. And, what we've been talking about through this series is how we find God, how just God shows up in the midst of our lives. He shows up in those moments, of hurt in the past. And we talked about that, how he releases us from that. And he opens up a future for us. And he shows up when we serve and we give back to him. And God just seems to show up in the middle of that. And we find him in the middle of these kinds of moments. And God is everywhere. He's present at all times, in all kinds of moments. The thing that I want to talk to you about today, where we want to end with this series, is on our journey to finding God. On this process where we're trying to see him, to behold him, to look him right in the face and to know who he is. The question that I want to ask is, what happens if we find him? What happens if we find him? What happens if we do everything that we talk about doing on the weekend? What happens if we go out and we serve, we get over some of the things that happened in our past, we say, God, I believe that you have unlocked a future. What happens when we find him in the midst of that moment? And even more so, what happens if I'm afraid of that moment? What if I'm afraid to find God? What if I'm afraid? What is he going to ask of me? What if I see him and he shows up and I know this is the moment? What do I give back to God? What can I possibly have that God would want even? What happens if I find God? I want to talk about a guy. His name is Tad. We're going to call him Tad. Tad is an ancient Israelite. He lived 3,000 years ago. Tad has a wife, 3 children. He gets up every day at the crack of dawn because Tad is a baker. Tad bakes bread for a living. He is very good at his craft. If you wanted the perfect golden loaf of bread, you would go to Tad. And so one day, Tad gets up, it's still dark outside, the kids are still asleep, thank the Lord, and Tad goes out, and he decides that he's going to take part in a process that is very, very special. And he takes flour that he normally doesn't use. This flour is very, very special. And he takes it and he goes in and he makes 12 perfect loaves of bread. They have to be perfect. They're golden brown. They just smell so good. Have you ever walked into a house where good bread is being cooked? You know what I'm talking about? You walk in through the front door and you just take that noser and it's like that smell of rolls and it's like, oh man, I arrived at the right place. That's what Tad's doing. And he takes this special bread and he takes it into this place called the temple. And this place called the temple, this is where the people find God. This is where God shows up for them on a regular basis. And he walks into one of the deepest rooms of that building. And there's a special place, a special table that he takes this bread. And he sets this bread down. And it fills the room. It smells wonderful. And they would do this every single day. And they did it for a number of reasons. One of the most important reasons was that it was an offering to God. They would put it down before him. And it meant something. It meant that God was with them. Because after all, you wouldn't serve bread to a God that wasn't there. And so you would get there and it would smell good. But I can't help but think about the human experience there. I can't help but think going in there and thinking the thought that God is with us, that he's there, he's in the moment. You would smell that bread and know that God is with. I can't help but think how hungry I would get in that room. I can't help but think I would just get a nose off of that in the morning and then immediately I'd be like, how long till lunch? When's the next break? I've got to get a snack in. This thing smells so good. I mean, have you ever walked into a bakery and just smelled what's going on? There's this place. Anybody like donuts? I love donuts. I walked in, there's this place called Krispy Kreme. I'm pretty sure you're aware of it. There's a special moment in Krispy Kreme. They have a sign in the window. And when it's on, it makes me happy. It says hot and ready. And that means that those Krispy Kremes have just come off the assembly line. They were just dropped, they were just fried, they are golden brown. While they were still hot, they were putting icing, and it is dripping off of it. I mean, we're talking lick your fingers. The only thing you got to think about is, am I going to drink it with a glass of milk, or am I going to dunk it in a cup of coffee? You walk in there, you eat it. The second you grab that, you can't walk by that place. You're going inside. You're thinking instantly, I'm hungry. But I just ate. I got room for a donut. You walk in there, you're instantly hungry. You know, it's that way. When you approach this room, it's that way. You're hungry. You know that God is there, but you're hungry. You know, there's another story where people were hungry before God. Jesus is teaching, and he's going from town to town, and he's telling people what life with God is like, how to have a relationship with him, what it would look like to live out that relationship with God. And he's going through all of these towns, and he's doing all of these miracles, and Jesus' reputation is spreading like wildfire. There's something known about this guy. He's different than some of the other teachers. And so on this particular day, Jesus shows up outside of town. And thousands of people show up to listen to him. Not just 10, this is not a small group. We're talking about thousands of people. The scriptures record that there's over 5,000 men that show up at this event. That means that when you count women and children, we're talking probably over 10,000 people show up to see Jesus that morning. They show up, they're experiencing it. Jesus is teaching, the day is going on, but then something happens. The disciples notice a problem. And so they come up to Jesus and they say, Jesus, we've got to send everybody home. Jesus looks at them, I'm sure perplexed in that Jesus kind of way. Well, guys, why in the world would that be? And the disciples look back and it was like, Jesus, everybody's hungry. And we've done the math because we're good like that. Massive amount of money, we don't have it. We've got to send them home right now. Jesus looks at him, and I'm sure this is just a Jesus moment where he's like, listen, guys, no. We're not sending these guys home. They have come here to listen to me. And so Jesus says, guys, why don't you tell me what you do have? They find one kid who's got 5 loaves of bread, and he's got 2 fish. And this is a great moment, because I'm sure the disciples come up. It's like, Jesus, we've took an inventory of all we had. They bring a basket with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and I'm sure they just plop it down at his feet. They say, this is it. And they're thinking in their mind, Jesus, you just wasted like 15 minutes of our time. We told you 5 loaves of bread. We told you 2 fish. This is it. We've got to send them home, right? I mean, come on, Jesus. 15 minutes wasted. But Jesus looks at him and says, this is great. He gets down on his hands and knees and he prays over the loaves and he prays over the fish. And he tells his disciples, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take this bread. I'm sure they broke it. I want you to distribute it to the people. I want you to take it out to them. Just keep giving it out. Keep reaching into that basket. Keep giving it to everyone who's there. And I want you to come back to me when you're done. And the disciples take these baskets and they start handing out bread. And they start handing out fish. And they're going around and they keep reaching into the basket. And the more that they give out, the more that they seem to have in there. And they walk around and it just keeps going. They work their way through the entire crowd. When everything is said and done, the people sit down and Jesus gives out fish sandwiches to the masses. That's what it is. I mean, these people didn't have plates with them. They didn't have forks with them. They didn't sit down at a dinner table. Who carries that with them? Who's that prepared, right? They had bread, they had fish, and they had fire. And they cooked that fish, and they slapped it on some bread, and they had a fish sandwich that day. And here's the crazy thing. The disciples went around afterwards and picked up all the leftovers, and they had baskets and baskets and baskets of leftovers. And you have to know that at this moment, Jesus is a really popular dude. He is so popular. You want to be the life of the party? Show up to that party with food. You don't have to be the funniest guy there. You don't have to be the funniest lady there. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves. You show up with food and people are going to be like, I love that dude. I love him. He's the one that shows up with food. Call him. It's the life of the party. That's that way. The crowds are nuts with Jesus. They're like, this is amazing. We just came up for this great teaching, and he just passed out fish sandwiches to everybody. They're willing to do anything for this Jesus guy. And so here's what happens. The day starts getting late. Jesus decides, hey, we need to go to another place. Let's go to another town. Let's go on the other side of Galilee. And so here's what happens. The disciples get in a boat, and Jesus says, I'll catch up to you. Don't worry, you guys go ahead. I'm sure the disciples thought, hey, he's going to get in a boat, and, he'll paddle out kind of after us. We'll go on ahead. Well, the disciples get going, it's starting to get late. The water's kind of a little bit rough, and they get going along, and they're practically almost there. And all of a sudden, they see somebody just walking across the sea. I mean, he's just taking a stroll on top of the water, catching up to the boat. They are totally freaked out. Then they find out, wait a minute, that's Jesus. He's literally walking across the water. They meet up. By the time Jesus catches up with them, they are on the other side of the sea. And I got to tell you guys something. If you're ever wondering whether you can trust Jesus, whether you can trust him with your lives, can I tell you what an average day looks like with Jesus? An average day looks like taking 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feeding like 12,000 people. And then just because it's late in the day and you got to get to the other side, I'm just going to take a casual stroll on top of the sea to get to the other side. What did yesterday look like for you? What's your average day look like? Not that for me. That's who this Jesus guy is. This is an average day for Jesus. They get to the other side of the sea, and something interesting is there. Guess who is on the other side waiting for Jesus? The crowds. They are on the other side. They are waiting for him there. This is amazing because Jesus took a direct route across the sea. He walked point A, point B, walked directly across that sea. Do you realize the crowds had to go around the sea in order to get there? That means that these guys were running to get there. What it took Jesus to walk, they had to run to get to the other side. How do you know? I mean, if he's handing out free food, they're hungry. He's going to show up. They're running around the other side. It's one of those moments where they run up, they're all out of breath, and then Jesus comes by and they're acting cool, like, oh, hey, Jesus, they're out of breath. They bend over. We've been here, waiting for you. And Jesus is like, yeah, right. I know. You just ran around. I would know because I walked directly here. And here's the amazing thing. They show up, and Jesus was waiting for this moment. This is the moment he's been waiting for. The whole setup is present. He was there, he was teaching them, he fed them. But this is the moment that Jesus has been looking for. And he turns to the crowd and he addresses them. And he says, I know why you're here. You're here because I fed you. You're here because you were hungry. And I prayed over some bread, I prayed over some fish, and now you're full. And then Jesus tells them something. He says, but that's not the reason why I've come. I haven't come so that you could be physically full. But I came here to give you something that you will never, ever hunger again from. And then Jesus turns to them and says something amazing. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Jesus says, you were hungry. I gave you bread yesterday. And I know you're hungry again because you ran to get here. And I want to feed you. But what I'm going to feed you, it's going to be difficult to hear. Because in order to never hunger again, you're going to need me. Jesus tells them, I am the bread of life. This is an amazing statement because those among the crowd who were Jewish, who had the most religious background, they knew exactly what this meant. And all of a sudden, they are up in arms. They knew, remember Tad in the temple? They knew what the bread meant. They knew that the bread meant that God was with them. And they knew that Jesus saying that he is the bread of life meant that Jesus was telling them that he is God. And they are upset about that. They don't understand how that could possibly be. They are ready to go after this guy, Jesus. And so Jesus turns to them and asks them a question. He tells them something that is so hard. He poses it to them, and he does it on purpose. He asks a question that tests whether or not they really, really want him. He's like, guys, listen, I'm going to ask you something. I want to tell you something. And this is where the rubber meets the road. And so Jesus turns to them and says, guys, you don't understand. I am the bread of life. I am this bread. And then he says, unless you eat of my flesh and unless you drink of my blood, you cannot have the life that you're seeking. This blows them away. You thought they were mad before. It's like a hornet's nest now. They look at Jesus. What in the world are you talking about? Has this man gone crazy? What could you possibly mean unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood? I mean, Jesus, we are not zombies. We don't do that. Other religions have human sacrifices. Other religions have blood that they drink and all this weird kind of stuff. We don't do that, Jesus. They get right up in his face. That's exactly what Jesus was looking for. Because Jesus wanted to ask them a question that really mattered. He wanted to ask them something that was hard. And what he wanted to know is, are you really committed to me? Are you really committed to following me? You'll follow me if I feed you. But will you follow me if I ask you something even ridiculous? Because here's what happens. There were thousands that had followed him to the other side. This huge crowd that went with him, waiting for that next meal. Jesus makes this one statement, and he went from thousands to the 12 again. Jesus knows how to clear a room. Thousands to the 12. Only the 12 remained at the end of this. Only the 12 were committed to him. The rest of them said, Jesus, that's ridiculous. There's no way I can do that. And they walked away. When Jesus was really looking for somebody to come up and say, Jesus, I don't understand what you just said. It seems like that would not be something that we would do. But I believe in you. I believe in what you've done. There's no denying what happened yesterday. So Jesus, could you tell me what that looks like? I'm willing. And he would have explained to them what life looks like. He would have explained to him that he didn't really mean to eat his flesh and to drink his blood, but that his body would be offered for them. They just sat down and had the most meaningful conversation that that person had ever experienced if they would have just been willing to say, yes, Jesus. I'm committed to you, Jesus. Even if you tell me something ridiculous, I'm going to do it for you, Jesus. And that's what he wanted. That's what Jesus wants from us. And there's another reason why Jesus uses this bread metaphor. You got to think, God is infinitely intelligent. There is no beginning and no end to what God knows. And so he could have communicated who he was through any number of things. But he chose bread. And the reason why he chose bread is because bread is the center of the Hebrew diet. For all these Israelites, bread is the center of what they eat. They had lamb, they had sheep, they had cattle, they had animal husbandry, all of that kind of stuff. But there wasn't enough meat really to go around. It was something for special nights. It was something for special events. What they ate most days were bread and olive oil. That's what they had in vast supplies. And so when Jesus is telling them, I am the bread of life, they would think temple in God's presence. They would think every single meal every day. That's the substance that feeds us. We were hungry, now we're full every single day. It's the center of the meal. And that loses something for us because bread is not the center of our diet. We don't think that way in that terms. When we think in terms, we think of proteins. We normally think when we're mapping out a diet, we're thinking about calories, we're thinking about proteins. That's the center. And so if Jesus was coming today, I think that he would pose it a lot differently. I think Jesus would come to us and be like, you guys don't understand. I'm the chicken in your chicken cordon bleu. I'm the steak at steak dinner. I'm the burger at your next cookout. I'm the turkey on Thanksgiving. I'm the ham on Christmas. And you know what? You may think that that's ridiculous. You may think it's absolutely ridiculous to say that Jesus is a turkey or that Jesus is a ham. But I'm saying that if you think that's ridiculous, we're actually getting to the heart of the story. Because they thought it was ridiculous too. That's why they turned around and they left. But Jesus is saying, guys, you have to make me the center. You need me. If you never, ever want to hunger again, I'm going to offer myself for you. And if you will commit to me, if you will turn your life over to me, if you are willing to make me the center of everything, you will experience life. You will be full. You'll never have to hunger again. Jesus is standing before us even right now. It's so tempting in life to take him away from the center. It's so tempting in life just to add Jesus, to take whatever the things are in life that seem to be most important and make that the main part of the meal. And to make Jesus a side dish, something that you order second. Or to make Jesus a condiment, or something you just sprinkle on just to make it taste better. But Jesus doesn't want that. He was willing to go to from the 5,000 to the 12 to find those who would commit to him above all else. So my question for you today is, will you make Jesus the center of everything? Because when you find God, when God shows up for you in life, that's all he wants. He just wants you. He wants you to be the one who will stand among the crowd and say, Jesus, no matter what you ask me, no matter how ridiculous it may seem, I will always say yes to you. I will always ask you the questions so that I understand better and do what you say. And after all, that's all we have for him. He did everything else. He paved the way on the cross so that we can have a relationship. He will pave the way for our futures. God has promised that to us. All we have to do is to give us to him. It's no wonder then that the last act of Jesus' public ministry, the last thing that he does before he goes to the garden to pray, is arrested, beaten, and put on the cross for us, is he sits down with those who are closest with him. They sit at a table. They've been eating. They've been enjoying the meal. And about halfway through, when they're starting to feel full, Jesus says, guys, I want you to stop for just a second. And he takes a loaf of bread and he breaks it. And he tells them, this is my body. This is given for you. Jesus knows that within a short amount of time, he's going to be dead for them. So he says, this is for you. And they took it, and they passed it, and they ate it, and he picked up a cup. And he said, this cup is for you. This is my blood. And he said, I want you to drink of it because from my blood comes forgiveness. And he says, from my blood comes the covenant or the promise to you that I will never leave you, that I will always provide for you, that no matter what I ask of you, you will always have enough and you will never hunger or thirst again through me. And they took that cup and they passed it around and they drank of it. And let me tell you something, this is very, very hard. But this is the moment that Judas leaves. This is the moment that the one that betrays Jesus, he leaves to go to betray Jesus at this moment. He stayed through the meal. This is the time he gets up and goes away. You want to know why? Because this was a time of commitment. This was the time when things got serious. This was the time where you had to step forward and be like, okay, Jesus, you got me. Whatever you say. And the disciples were going to make mistakes. Peter is hours away from denying Jesus. But they said, I will commit to you. No matter what, I'm going to make mistakes, God, but I will commit to you. They ate that bread and they drank that juice. Will you make that commitment to Jesus? Will you just put him in the center of everything? The good, the bad, the ugly, whatever it looks like. Guys, we want to take communion today. We want to do that in a different way. And so if you could do something for me, if you could just split the room in half, come through the middle, come up. I want you to grab a cup of juice, and I want you to grab one of the crackers, and I'd like for you to come back to your seats. So if you could do that now. It is customary in our culture that whenever we make that kind of commitment, whenever we say, I'm going to do something, it's customary to take a vow. And in this moment, I want you to think in terms of wedding. I want you to think about that moment where you make a promise to someone. And it is a promise that you want to keep. And you want to keep it forever. That's what this meant for Jesus. That's why this is the last thing right at the end. And I'm going to say some words, and I want you to repeat them after me. And I want you to think about this, because this is real. God is here. He is with us. That's what the bread means. And so if you want, you can picture God right before you. You can picture God sitting right beside you, whatever that looks like. But I want you to say these words, knowing that God hears you today. So repeat after me. Jesus, I believe that you came to earth, that you lived a perfect life, that you died on a cross for the sins of the world, that you were buried, resurrected, and are reigning over us now. I confess to you and ask that you forgive me all my sins. I thank you that you have forgiven me of my past, my present, and my future. All sins. You are represented by the bread in my hand. You can hold it now. It is like your body to me. It means that you are with me. Nothing can take that away from me. It means that in you, I will never hunger again. Nothing can take that away from me. I eat it because you have given your body for me on a cross. Nothing can take you away from me. Jesus, you are my center. I will not let anything get in the way of that. Let me take and eat. You can now take the cup. Jesus, you are represented by the cup in my hand. It is like your blood to me. It means your promises to me are sealed by your blood. Nothing can take them away from me. It means that I am forgiven. Nothing can take that away from me. It means that your blessing has been poured out for me. Nothing can take that away from me. I drink it because you are my Lord. Nothing can take you away from me. Jesus, you are my center. I will not let anything get in the way of that. Now you may drink. Make him your center. You've taken the vow. At every opportunity that he gives you, at every moment you need it, every choice you make, put Jesus first. He's the center of everything. The best life that we possibly can have is with Jesus at the center. When you put Jesus first, you don't ever have to worry, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right things? Am I going in the right direction? Jesus in the center means you always are doing the right thing. You are always on the right path. God is always taking you where you need to go.